Welcome to Vendée Radio. It is September 10th in the year of our Lord 2022, and I am rejoined by Dr. Thaddeus Kozinski. It's a great pleasure to have Dr. Kozinski back on Vendée Radio. Dr. Kozinski is the author of the substack letter Clemi, which is taglined "Deconstructing Propaganda to the Glory of God and for the Salvation of Souls." He's also the author of a forthcoming work, which I believe is tentatively titled Antichrist Rising, the Plandemic and the Age of Unreality. Dr. Kozinski, welcome back to Vendée Radio. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks so much. I am near San Francisco. That's why I have that background there, just in case anybody's wondering. Not the most truth-friendly place, but I like to be in the belly of the beast. Why not? And there's a great Catholic Latin Mass in San Francisco, a star of the Father Ilo. It's a wonderful, thriving parish, beautiful Latin Mass there every Sunday, and it's a diocesan Mass, so it's great. About that new book, still looking for a publisher. I have it's under consideration right now. The tricky part about it is it's both thoroughly Orthodox Catholic and thoroughly anti-plandemic, and you put those two together and it's hard to find a publisher because those who would want to publish it for its truth about the scandemic don't quite like the Catholic parts, and those who would want to publish it for my meditations on the implications of all this in spiritual terms don't really like the plandemic part. So we'll see what happens.
Yes, it's interesting you mentioned that disjunction, and I'd like to talk about that a bit more later on. First of all, just to recap, in our last interview, Dr. Thaddeus Kozinski discussed his 2019 book, Modernity as Apocalypse, Sacred Nihilism and the Counterfeits of Logos, which I would recommend to all our listeners. It's a great primer for the times we're living in 2022. And that interview was with regard to the latest of the play of shadows cast on the cave wall with the COVID pseudo-pandemic. That was in March that we spoke last. And you elaborated your thesis that we're seeing a Girardian escalation of violence, among other things, which finds its genesis.
Sorry, go ahead. No, I got excited when you said that. Go ahead, finish your sentence.
Well, that it's rooted in our attempt to secure political order and peace,
yes,
absent corporate repentance and obedience to the gospel, and that is a type of apocalypse. So here we are in September. Despite the quietening, shall we say, of the pseudo-pandemic narrative, although it could be heading back this winter, nevertheless, we do seem to be on the precipice of seismic convulsions. There is mass gaslighting over the inflation that is taking place across the West, its causes, no mention of the lockdowns. And what I'm seeing, Dr. Kozinski, is a deficient analysis. I'm seeing a lot of bitty, disaggregated, swirling, ricocheting analysis that's sort of bewildering at times. But no one's really, in my mind, adequately connecting all of these pieces in a comprehensive analysis. For example, considering the economics alongside the medical dynamics and taking a step back and, most importantly, looking at the entire panorama with a supernatural logic. So considering the energy crisis, the vaccine injuries and deaths, the war on cash, the anthropogenic climate change hoax, currency crisis, inflation, debt, attacks on the food supply, transhumanism, globo-homo, cultural Marxism, all these threats to what remains of Christian civilization. So that satisfactory analysis has yet to be transmitted. And I think if you go to many more traditional Catholic-leaning publications, such as The Remnant, you might get a lot of it, but you won't. There's a lack of depth, I find often.
Yes.
And identifying that those long-term secularization currents, which is the apostasy of Western man from God have led to this point. And they won't go deeper into looking at the problems of the right wing of the deep state, the deeper influence and control of Jewish power, Masonic power, and analysis can be very superficial and sort of tabloidy, where it's, Trump and Putin are fighting the New World Order, or Mar-a-Lago's been desecrated, and it just seems to lack some of that. I don't know if that's something you've detected as well.
Sure, and I'd like to understand the cause of this, and I don't want to put too much blame on these outlets that are doing great work. I mean, Michael Matt videos he's doing every couple of weeks from the Remnant. I don't know if you've seen any of where he puts a lot together. He's putting a lot together. I mean, he's certainly a Catholic who's talking about the scandemic, who's talking about the New World Order. There are some issues that nobody wants to take up, and because it means instant marginalization and deplatforming and criminalization. And I mean, that's just true for everyone, and one has to be prudent, not because one is being a coward, but because one has to think about his or her livelihood, and it's true. So there's that. So in other words, there is a coordinated, systematic, deliberate effort to prevent certain realities from being transmitted and being part of people's consciousness. So that's true, right? Add to that the fact that many of the good-willed people who are intelligent and have some sense of spiritual understanding have themselves, to some extent, internalized the commands of their oppressors, so that they self-censor. And they literally have cognitive dissonance about certain issues. They have unconscious allegiance to certain narratives, and they also have a very emotional and fear-based understanding of what they can and cannot say according to the norms of their particular tribe. And this is especially true in academia. To a lesser extent, more popular media. So you have that. You also have a lack of depth of understanding of history, and that's because we have a lot of history that's propaganda, but also because of the destruction that's happened over the past 100 years. And not to mention that we're in a global totalitarian state. In other words, there is an all-out assault on truth, unprecedented history of human beings, and it's only going to get worse. I'm surprised that there is anyone who's able to put any of the pieces together, and yet there are, because God is allowing that. He's still allowing us tools like social media, the internet, which can be used for great good, where we can find the truth. It's still there. They haven't been able to shut it down. But you're right. To put all the pieces together, there's sort of two ways of looking at this. I mean, how many people can put all the pieces together in terms of the positive, in terms of the theological view of history, in terms of how God's reign is manifesting itself, how faith and reason go together? In other words, metaphysically, theologically, ecclesiologically, everything, metaphysically, it's hard enough to put all that together in terms of what's true and good and beautiful, in terms of the universal truth and the historical manifestation of that. But now you have to have that already set in place in order to be able to understand the counterfeits of these and the attacks on them. How many people have that in place? First of all, a very, very small minority of anyone in the world. And Catholics, of course, there's been a deliberate assault on the ability for Catholics to be able to think holistically and integrally like that, we know. But then you have to then be able to understand the evil in an integrated, systematic way with all the players. The octopus, as Peter Koenig, you just mentioned the octopus, I think. Peter Koenig just gave a video on the octopus, trying to make sense of like the head and all the tentacles. You could spend a lifetime trying to figure that out. trying to understand all the movers and shakers, from the Freemasons, the left, the right, the other occult group, WEF now, the Bilderbergs, Council on Foreign Relations. I mean, you could spend your life just studying the machinations of one of these things, and yet they're all integrated. Nobody really knows at the top, do they? I don't know. The ones up are deliberately, of course, doing everything they can to be hidden. I don't know if we'll ever know. So look, we're dealing with something that's just unthinkable or insurmountable, and I think we do our best. And that gets to the question of how much do you have to know before you act? Because you could sit around and just study this thing for 12 hours a day and do nothing about it, and still not get to the bottom. But I don't know. That's an interesting question. I mean, how much do you have to go down the rabbit hole? How much do you have to spend time doing that? How much time doing other constructive things for the kingdom? I don't know. Interesting questions, but I get your frustration, and I agree with you. It's a tough issue, and I mean we're now entering into, tomorrow is the 9/11 anniversary, right? That was the beginning, wasn't it? The beginning of, in a sense, I call it the beginning of the reign of Antichrist that day, because that's when I think we had the totalitarianism beginning, the censorship, the propaganda, the narrative. That's when I first realized, a few years after that, I started to go down the rabbit hole and become red pill, to use these expressions, because I realized we weren't told the truth. How many today among the Catholic intelligentsia understand that, and how many of them are willing to talk about it? I've never seen the remnant talk about it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But in order to understand the pandemic, you really have to understand that. You really do. It's disappointing that, and it's time, right? It's 2001. It's 21 years after. I think these days it's not as dangerous to talk about that issue as it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
But it's still, as you say, a failure to come to terms with those events, those hoaxes, in the sense that the presentation of the narrative of what happened there amounts to a hoax. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but the way that it was depicted. And
no, events are always, there's always events, and there's murders, and there's tragedy, and there's evil people, and there's good people trying to do good things, like the firemen trying to save people. We're talking about the construction of a counterfeit account narrative of the cause of it. And that's not really a narrative of what happened. Sometimes it is, but it's the cause and the perpetrators is where we get the counterfeit.
Yeah,
that's the same thing with the pandemic, right? Everybody knows there's some kind of thing going on here. It's not completely made up, is it? So I mean, I guess I'm not really of the opinion that there aren't viruses in the world. I don't know. I haven't looked into the germ theory. That's another rabbit hole I haven't gone down into. But obviously, there's something going on. And we know that the narrative of that was, I mean, as much as you can, lying about it to the biggest possible extent. But an effective propaganda narrative has to have some reality it's distorting, doesn't it?
Yes, and that leads us on to one of your recent Substack essays on the age of counterfeits. It's titled, "What Does It Profit to Gain the Whole World and Lose Thy Soul?" This is the activity of the devil. The devil doesn't have any clay himself. He mars and distorts the creations of God. He is the simia Dei, the monkey of God, the ape, the the one that counterfeits. I wonder if you'd like to give the listeners a synopsis of your essay there.
Sure. Well, other essays have touched on the issue. I feel like I'm saying the same thing every time in these essays in different ways, and taking in new information and integrating it. It's the same thesis. We're in an unprecedented age, the age of unreality, the age of counterfeits. This has always been present in history, this element of lies, but there's never been a whole scale, coordinated, systematic, just ubiquitous unreality that like we have today, and in so many different areas, in so many different forms. And I guess that's just what I'm writing about. I'm trying to get people to realize this, and I'm also trying to understand why it's this way and what good could come out. And in that essay, maybe in both of the latest two essays, I'm emphasizing that this is a trial, and God is setting up, allowing counterfeits of him and his kingdom and everything about the Catholic Church and Jesus Christ and truth and good and beautiful. Everything that could lead you to God is being counterfeited. And God's allowing that because he wants most of all for us to be able to choose him. And the price is high. The stakes are high. If you don't, you get sucked into the counterfeit. And just like in Plato's cave, you don't know it's a counterfeit completely. And you may not be able to know, because there's a sense in which you've given your core, your heart over to this lie. And maybe that, and I mean, that's a mystery, how to understand why God would permit that. Because it seems like there are a lot of innocent victims who are unable to see that this is a counterfeit by design. And so I wonder about those people. But in this particular essay, I emphasize that the worst sin would be to choose a counterfeit knowing it is. And then I ponder that. How is that possible? How is it possible for someone to choose evil as evil, or to choose a lie as a lie? It makes sense to think somebody doing this being deceived or deceiving themselves, but in the end, at the end of the day, they think it's true, even though they're deceived. But what about the possibility that they really don't? They really don't. They know that they know, in a sense, they're deceived, and they simply want something more than the truth, knowing that they're doing that, knowing it's the truth. And I remember first thinking this with the 9/11 attacks, because these people who do these attacks usually leave clues. It's called revelation. Called revelation of the method.
Yeah.
They want you to kind of sense that you're being fooled, right? But they also want you to not care about that enough, because the narrative is something you love so much. What does it do for you to embrace the narrative of 9/11? You get to feel yourself as part of the good guys. You get to know who the evil is. You get to feel saved and feel secure and feel righteous simply because you're part of this tribe that was attacked. That's a kind of salvation. And at some point, you want that so much that you refuse to look at the very good possibility that it's not true. I really do believe that was happening then, and I think that was the intention. It's the dark liturgy, right? Because in the true liturgy, God never makes secrets. He doesn't give us secrets. He lays it all out. He says, here's what it is. You can go deeper into it, right? But it's never that the liturgy is all about more and more revealing of the truth, so that you choose it for the sake of its truth. Whereas dark liturgy is a revelation of evil and lies such that you believe it and embrace it as a lie because you want it more than the truth. That's dark liturgy. And in many ways, the whole COVID liturgy that we had, and you could see it, right? There's sacramentals, there's sacraments, there's priests, there's dogma, there's the sheeps and the goats. I think it was also meant to, in a way, reveal the method, to put the clues in there that they're being lied to. And so, yeah, that's what I sort of meditate on in that essay on counterfeits. Is that what's going on? Are people being led to choose counterfeits as counterfeits?
Yes, I discussed this with another guest, Michael Jonah of Nineveh, the problem of consent, how the devil desires the consent, the willing consent of souls in order to ensure their perdition. And we certainly saw an opting for unreality from many, many learned, esteemed Catholic intellectuals, shepherds, lay leaders. In the last 2 years, you mentioned the philosopher Ed Feser. I've talked before about the SSPX statements in response to the injections, Roberto Di Mattei. These otherwise very sound figures who are incredibly learned in Thomistic metaphysics and the revolution in history and the adherence to the church's doctrinal and liturgical integrity. But then you just have this ahistorical Thomism when it comes to addressing a great attack of evil happening right now.
Yeah, let's just talk about whether, in theory, if there was a plague or a pandemic, could a common good authority, the state, mandate certain medical requirements to protect the common good? Oh, yes, they could. Okay, well, then we shouldn't be really against these things. Okay, Ed Feser and others, they're mandating poison. You idiot. Okay.
These people are up in their ivory towers and everything is abstraction for them, where they prioritize ideas over things. And they choose to, or I don't know, but the fact that they cannot have seen in the year prior to that the violation of public health policy protocols with regard to quarantining the healthy, which is unprecedented, with the ludicrous claims that asymptomatic transmission drives an epidemic, with the ludicrous claims that this respiratory virus was spreading on surfaces, that it could be stopped with the wearing of muzzles. This whole architecture of lies that would somehow be apart from the state's imperative and the huge propaganda campaign and intimidation to force citizens to receive this experimental serum, and that they just stand dispassionately from all of that history. And this is what I mean about ahistorical Thomism, and just, as you say, look to apply these abstract principles.
Look, you have an obligation. If you call yourself a philosopher, okay, you advertise yourself as a philosopher, and you've got this little quote on your website, Ed Feser is one of the greatest philosophers today. Okay, you are obliged to follow the truth where it leads. You know why? Because that's your vocation. Not everybody has the ability and the balls to do that, and the intelligence and the education. Okay, that's your job. And you do need to know the abstract truths, and you're able to comprehend them better than other people. Okay, that's why you're chosen for this by God. But you also have to find out what's going on the ground. Okay, and you're good. You should be able to do that too with all your research skills, right? So there's nobody more able and almost cultivated for the job of going into the darkness and finding out the truth and coming back like a hero's journey to reveal that to us common people. Okay, You dare to use your perch and use your vocation to obfuscate the truth, okay, for whatever reason. At best, you're just some, like you said, ivory tower, a historical Thomist, and you don't know what you're doing, and you think you know what you don't know. That's also Socratic sin. Okay, you're supposed to know what you don't know. At worst, though, you know to some extent that it might be true what Thaddeus Kozinski is saying, that conspiracy theorist. But you're going to lose your prestige, your little perch. Someone's not going to like you. Is that the reason? Is that the reason? Because if that's the reason, you're on your way to hell. Okay? You're on your way to hell. That's the reason. And I'm afraid that many people are in this situation. It seems like that to me, that they've chosen their perch, their prestige, their little tribe group. And that is an example of choosing the counterfeit. And you know why I say this? Because when you confront them with incontrovertible evidence, okay, for instance, that this is poison, how many have you seen convert? I almost have seen nobody convert once they've made this decision. They you know what they do? They scapegoat you, they mock you, they cancel you, they slander you. Okay? And it's like, hey, philosopher, you're not allowed to do that. You need to look. You need to look. Okay? You need to look. You're not allowed to say, see no evil, hear no evil. So this is the treason of the Catholic intellectuals, the treason of the bishops, the treason of Bergoglio. And you know what kind of treason it is? Murderous. If there's one person who read Fesser, who got the shot and died, I mean, I wouldn't want to be in his shoes.
Right. Yeah, that goes for many other Catholic leaders, are both clergy and laity, who took the same position. And it's this post-Cartesian split, again, between thinking and doing, where, St. Thomas Aquinas obviously spent great time in the studium, writing the Summa Contra Gentiles and the Summa Theologica and so on, corresponding with the King of Cyprus. But he was also out in the public square preaching. Yes. And he was also going to the Dominican convocations as a definitor of the Roman province to discuss the tangible, pastoral matters of the day. He was not this pure Cartesian abstract thinker, and that's the model that they're not following.
Yeah, but then they also try to come off as they are. They're like down-to-earth guys, and they also, talk about all this research they've done and they show it, but don't they realize, I mean, the main thing is, as a Catholic, as a human, but especially as a Catholic, you have the obligation to know as much as possible when you're being lied to, because then you can't act prudently. Okay, if you don't have the data, you can have all the principles of in the world true. You can have the best intentions too. You can have the virtues, right? But prudence requires knowledge of the on the ground facts of things. And we are not in a position right now to be able to just unquestionably, without question, just accept what any authorities tell us. How could you possibly think we are in this situation? And by the way, these same people who mouth the party line on certain issues, they're the first to be skeptical of other authorities and narratives, right? So they're not naive. But when it comes to certain ones, I wonder why all of a sudden they're different. By the way, that article by Fesser was written a while ago, I think over a year ago, the one I cited. I'm open to I don't follow his work, so I'm open to the possibility that Dr. Fesser has changed his mind and has seen the truth. I have not yet seen him retracting that. So, hey, Ed, I call on you, I challenge you right now to find the truth, discover it, and then retract that essay, and then apologize to everyone who you misled and maybe has caused the death of, unintentionally, I'll give you that. But this is a life and death matter now. It's coming to the point, it used to be like where, you talked about liberalism and maybe you didn't really deconstruct enough. You kind of like certain forms of liberalism, but not others. This is the first things before with Richard Newhouse was like this, right? You had Michael Novak and Weigel, and they just scapegoated and slandered David Schindler and Michael Hamby and these guys who were trying to show them that they were wrong, right? It didn't seem like anybody died because of this, I mean, it was just sort of intellectual in-house debating, right? I mean, there were consequences, spiritual, definitely, but right now it's life or death. Okay, you philosophers and theologians, the stakes are high, like higher than you can imagine here, for souls, for bodies, and I don't know, it's scary. I mean, I don't think that I'm just as scared. I'm scared for myself. The stakes are so high now, so it's parlous, the situation we're in. And
people have always had their court sophists.
Yes.
And as you mentioned earlier, there is the sort of personal prudential consideration of protecting one's livelihood.
Yes.
Or let's say as the father of a household who's trying to raise his family in as traditional an ambience as he can, and let's say has a position at Catholic University of America or Steubenville.
Right.
They know it's sort of unspoken that there are certain things they can't say.
Yes.
Now, as I say, those are prudential matters, so it's hard to make general statements. But I do wonder that the revolution, the enemies of the church, are so powerful now that it precludes so almost a total articulation of truth on vital issues that you have to wonder where it's going to come from. And are we at a point where at some point people just need to take the hit and prepare for martyrdom even?
I think we are. And I think everybody has to discern this, but I think it's becoming, right now, just think about this. In Germany, because of the deception of the Ukraine event, the Germans have cut themselves off from Russia. The Nord 1, and it's not Nord. What is it?
Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines.
I didn't want to say Nordstrom. I was scared, afraid of saying Nordstrom, the department store. Nord Stream 1 and 2, right? Doing this because of the propaganda that we have to support Ukraine, their freedom fighters, and we as well as I know, this is all just in a way scamdemic part 2, 9/11 part 3, whatever you want to say, false flag and propaganda and demonization and all the same old script, right? But because of this, Germany may not be able to heat their homes this winter. There may be food shortages and starvation and deaths from cold. So at this point, do we have prudence here when we're talking about, or how about people who are afraid to speak out, who think those vaccines might be toxic? We have a Holocaust in our midst. Millions are dead already, murdered, cold blood murdered by these shots, whoever orchestrated them. And many millions more will be murdered. Really? It's not time to talk about that? Okay, so I mean, you're right. I don't know. You're right that at some point it gets so bad that it's martyrdom and it's preaching the truth at all costs. I hear you. I think you're right, and there have been some scholars who have Catholic intellectuals who have come out against the shots. There's very few of them, but there have been some, and I think it's funny. They tend to be retired, and they no longer work for an institution, and they've got a pension, and they're old, and they kind of say, "Hey, I can tell the truth now." But even they don't always tell the whole truth. But it's funny. It's funny how much coercion there is. We have free speech, right? Laws, and you can say what you want, but the self-censoring is incredible. It's almost worse than if you didn't have free speech rules.
Yep, dynamic silence. They've got plausible deniability where they can still give this lip service to liberal democracy, which never existed, but they can nevertheless sort of disguise the tyranny behind that. And as you say, the choice has always been martyrdom or Christendom. There are no other choices eventually.
Yes.
And it is imperative on those that are able to take the hit to do so. I think that you mentioned the difficulties that we're likely to encounter this winter. Mass deaths are very deflationary. And with the runaway inflation we have at the moment, this might be a part of the agenda lockdowns are deflationary, to get the monetary situation under control as a result of the profligate credit creation in response to the pseudo pandemic, because this is my analysis, they are purposefully demolishing the currency because it has been debased over such a long time since the sexual revolution, which was the social pronouncement that we were no longer going to have the family as the basis of the social order, which is the end of growth. Yes. Only something is alive if it's growing. And when we collectively took that decision, that was the end of the economy. It just took 70 odd years for it to play out. But those demographic trends are now finally being realized, the effects are being felt. I've got here a map that I might put on screen for our viewers. It's of the world in 1950, and it's by each continent the average age, the median age. North America is 30, Europe is 29. Then by 2020, North America is 39, so it's 9 years older, and Europe is 43. So this is information that the Judeo-Masonic elites know, and they know that it's too late to turn this around now. It's like a tank. You're going to feel the pernicious effects before you're able to remedy it. With these median ages now, it's beyond the fertile age of women. So to have the policies that you'd need, which would be basically dismantling of the welfare state and the ending of this gluttonous spending and debt, you would cause a mass revolution. So the usurpation of the money power, scripture says that the debtor is under the power of the creditor. And what we've seen with the embrace of the consumerist materialist lifestyle by society across the West since the sexual revolution, when man started worshipping money instead of God, is this surrender to the money power. Whereas Revelation 18 says the merchants became your lords of the earth, the bridegroom and the bride were silent; they were not to be found.
And the pharmakeia.
And by the pharmakeia, all nations were deceived. That's an image of Babylon, which is a figure of the earthly city, the Augustinian earthly city, as opposed to Jerusalem, the city of God. And that is a description of our current dismal, tragic situation in the apostate nations of the West. And I think this explains why this Judeo-Masonic elite are intensifying and accelerating their aggression towards the remains of Christian civilization so strongly at the moment. They're considering these architectonic trends. They know that bourgeois consumerist paradigm is already over. 2019 was the peak consumerist society. It's all downhill from here. And sovereignty, one aspect of sovereignty is credit creation, is money creation. That's why we used to have the Queen on the currency. You have George Washington, the federal government. That public privilege has been usurped by private interests because banks create money. And this is something that's been conclusively proven by Richard Werner, Catherine Austin Fitts. So we've seen there the punishment for our sins, that the merchants have become the lords of the earth. And they know that the national debt, the sovereign debt, is getting to a stage now, like the Ancien Regime in France, where the government are unable to borrow the amount to service the interest on its debt. They're not even able to borrow enough to service the interest just to maintain the debt. So they're about to go bankrupt. And that's why they're collapsing the currency after all this debasement, after all this usury, and where they've had access to this sovereign privilege of credit creation. And this is another fundamental issue that conservatives won't address, that this money power has usurped sovereignty from the nation state. To give an example, on the demographic side, in Estonia, the school system is going to collapse in 5 years from lack of teachers because of the demographic winter that they're heading into. They just won't be able to run the state school system. So we're on the precipice of all of this. I think the elite conceal this, they know this, and that's why they are imposing these authoritarian forms in order to control and pacify the population and make fear the basis of the social order, to bring in tyranny, which they'll need once the standard of living collapses, which it's in the process of doing right now.
Wow, that's a great analysis. You should write that down and publish it. That was very good.
That's what I'm doing. Yeah, I'm working on that.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, that's coming. And so I guess I haven't thought much about what to do in this situation that's coming. As a Catholic, as a father of a family, and as a philosopher and teacher, it's hard for me to imagine what that is going to look like and feel like, what it's going to mean to be a missionary and to save souls in that situation, how I'm going to make it and survive. Honestly, I don't think I have the ability or courage to really keep that in the front of my mind. I don't know. Do you have advice on that? This is when it comes to that kind of thing, the practical in a situation of the apocalypse and Mad Max and the Hunger Games and whoever else. This has been given to us imaginatively in fiction and movies, right? I mean, we've kind of seen what it is, what it might look
programming.
Like. It is predictive programming. Yeah, Mad Max, Hunger Games, the Book of Eli, Blade Runner, maybe. I don't know.
Zombie artifacts.
The zombie, and then you've got the AI going crazy with all those movies. I don't know. Do you think God might prevent it? Do you think there's a chance that God can intervene I mean, that's their plan, right? But they don't own property, these guys. The God's just given them a bit of a string to hang themselves, but a rope. But is it still possible to prevent this, or is God going to allow it because that will be another trial and another way that God's forcing us to cry out to Him, and again, the script is given us in Revelation. One thing we neither of us have talked about today is this question of the possible intervention of God. And from my study of mystics, there is something that's going to happen before this great chastisement, which is maybe what you're talking about. Maybe we're just in the initial stages of it, and that's the warning. This is the universal recognition of everybody's position before God, the illumination of all consciences. If anything could prevent this from happening, it could be that. Or is that going to bring it into even faster application because of the panic and I don't know. Any thoughts on any of that? I'm just interested what you think.
I think that God is going to allow systemic collapse. He needs to break modern man's pride and stony hearts, to have the monstrous pride to think that you can live life ignoring your creator and savior, to live a life of practical atheism where your daily life, habits, customs testifies to the non-existence of God is not what we were made for. And that's why I think that atheism, as Father Thomas Green says, is not an intellectual problem, it's a moral problem.
Yes.
Everyone believes in God. It's just that some have got into a stage of mortal sin, where they rationalize non-belief of God in order to ignore or to turn away from the eye of judgment. Not to say that everyone rationally believes in the triune God of revelation and the contents of the faith without hearing that, but nevertheless they will believe as a defined dogma that they can rationally believe in the Creator. And so man needs to be reminded of that, and I think that's why this collapse will happen, of how dark the horizon is, turning away from God. Nicholas Gomez Davila said, modernity will not be punished, modernity is punishment. And there's something of that dynamic happening, but God being the God of love that he is, that collapse, I think, will merge into an illumination to conscience, as you say, and then a divine chastisement, fire from heaven, as Our Lady of Fatima, Our Lady of Akita has described. And I think that will be felt most keenly by hireling churchmen.
Yes.
Most to blame for this.
And by the way, why are they most to blame? Getting back to our issue of prudence and preservation of your family, they don't have families. Okay, the bishops and priests, they have nothing to lose and everything to gain. They don't have to protect a wife and children. The fact that they're the ones who would have been needed to speak up, because they can be martyred in a way. I mean, we could all be martyred, yes, but you know what I'm saying? Like, in other words, the reason they're bishops and the reason why there's a vow of chastity and they don't have families is because they are called to lay down their life for their sheep. That's their main job. And I'm just saying, you're right. They're going to be held responsible because they were the ones who were supposed to speak up. You and I, it's heroic virtue if we do it. It's normal virtue. It's what they're called to by their very vocation to do it. And the fact that not only did they not do it, but they did the opposite. I mean, it's unimaginable how evil the bishops have been. Unimaginable.
Yeah, they chose friendship with the world. And the Epistle of St. James describes that choice. So we are their spiritual children. We are their flock. They are our fathers. And
yes,
errant fatherhood is the greatest scourge that we can possibly have. And that characterizes the whole tragedy of modernity,
it does.
errant and abusive fatherhood.
Well, because we know what that does. It eclipses the father, the true father, from consciousness, or it makes us hate the true father, or fear the true father, or be disgusted, or, I mean, anything but love and knowledge, right? So you're right. There's nothing, and that's why Saint Joseph maybe is the greatest saint for today, because he mirrored the eternal Father for the Son of God. He's the ultimate anti-modern, isn't he? In that sense.
It's a sublime meditation which one could plumb for one's entire life, what one could meditate on. You're right, the awesome privilege and responsibility of human fathers to image God the Father to their children. And as you say, that God chose a man who was conceived in sin to image God the Father to the Son of God. Is beyond words.
It is.
But I'm seeing consolations and signs of hope as things get worse. I'd be interested if you've encountered this, particularly from people from the millennial generation, Generation Z, who are being more and more drawn to metaphysical realism and then ultimately the faith.
Yes.
And they come with a spirit of an uncompromising spirit, with a rigid spirit. And I think that trend is going to just accelerate.
The Padre Pio actor,
right? Yeah.
Do you remember his name?
Shia LaBeouf.
Yeah, that's a good example of this, isn't he?
Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
And of course, they get made fun of and mocked by the Where Peter Is crowd, the progressives, the Pope Francis lovers. I mean, they're in for it too. These guys, they mock everything that's good and hate everything they mock and hate everything that's good, and they promote everything that's evil, and they do it with this smarmy sort of holier than thou arrogance and piety. Oh my gosh.
That's another rabbit hole, but I think a lot of those people, I'm not pointing any figures anyone in particular, but I get the sense a lot of them aren't actually Catholic, in that, that it's a completely astroturfed organization. And we know from John Podesta's emails where the Catholics for Spring was this idea of setting up a heterodox, dissenting, liberal Catholic movement that would be sort of controlled by American intelligence to advocate for heretical positions. And so I wonder if a lot of these figures, there was something about Father James Martin being chosen, this idea that he's an agent provocateur. He's put out there to purposefully to aggravate and irritate and kind of make these shocking and horrendous statements, for example, about Bishop Rembert Weekland, who died, and then he kind of pulls that back, and then he tentatively, it's very pathetic, all these games that they play. People are starting to see through it, though, I think, more and more.
You're probably right. I should ignore them more. It's bad for me, I think, to I get so mad.
No, likewise, I completely sympathize. Yeah.
So there is hope, and I think it does seem to me that as more people drop dead and get sick, it's just going to become impossible not to recognize what happened. Of course, there's going to be people who will never see it, right? But I don't know. Do you think that they're not going to be able to? I mean, they're going to try to cover it up. They're going to try to say that it's caused by loud noises and people sleeping on their stomachs and sudden adult death and all that. But do you think that they overplayed their hands? I mean, we know that evil always overplays, and it always it's the hubris, it's the tragic fall, and they can't help themselves, right? They have to, they must, and God allows them to on purpose. Do you think that might be the case to some extent?
I think so. The devil digs pits for his own followers. And as you say, there's the revelation of the method as well, where they're almost inviting you to realize the delusion that the powerful delusions, to use the biblical language, that they have given themselves over to. You've probably done more research than I on the actual medical effects of this serum. I think that undoubtedly it is immunosuppressant.
Yes.
So what we're seeing is and it's compounding. So the more booster shots that they give, and that's what they're doing at the moment to kill all the old people, because that's also deflationary and depopulates, helps alleviate the burden on the welfare state. As they continue to do that, I think over a long timeline, yes, we're going to see a lot of very vulnerable people with their immune system, which is worsened by the great poisoning, the toxic environments that we talked about before we went live, and then the possible food shortages and bad living conditions, the cold, and so on. So yeah, I think it's all part of that. I don't know if, I mean, obviously there's massive instances of myocarditis and heart problems, but I don't know if that's going to be completely for people that have received the shot. I do think if they have, there are steps they can take to bolster their immune system.
There's also, I heard a report about this. I forgot which scientist or doctor. A lot of it was placebo. I understand the first time around, and then they get a lot of people to take it. Look, everything's fine. Look, it's great. And then the next time they make it maybe 50% placebo, 50%, and then they keep raising it up. So there are people who received a placebo and nothing will happen. And that was ingenious for them to do that. Yep. And there is some steps to take to detoxify. That's true. Dr. Mikovits is good on that. I mentioned her. Judy Mikovits has a whole protocol for that, which my wife is taking, not because she got the shot, but because of the shedding. And she's been suffering effects of the shedding of other people who've gotten the shots. So anyway, yeah, it's a good time to be alive Theo. The best time. We're in. What is that Chinese proverb? Cursed are you if you're born into interesting times, or something like that. That's what they are. And I would just encourage everyone to see that all of this as an occasion to become that saint that you say you want to be. That this is it. God's not allowing you to live a bourgeois, materialistic, worldly existence. It's not going to work. You can't do it. And if you do it, read my articles about this. If you try to turn your eyes away from this, you will be choosing the counterfeit, and you'll be doing it to some extent, knowing it's a counterfeit. God doesn't want you to do that. But if you do, the stakes are high. It means more culpability and less chance of grace, you encountering grace, you being receptive to it. So to me, I would rather live where the sign of hell is right there in front of you, and you know exactly where not to go, or where to go if you want, than the slowly sloping hill that C.S. Lewis talks about in the Screw Tape Letters, where imperceptible decline into damnation. And that's what we have. We don't have that imperceptible decline. That was the 80s, maybe, the 90s. But I think after 9/11, we haven't had it. It's been growing to this. And in that sense, it's a godsend. I do not understand how to reconcile any of this with God's mercy when I think about children being vaccinated, murdered, as well as getting sex change operation irreversible. I leave that to God, because when I think about that, I get mad at God, to be honest. I shouldn't, but I know I shouldn't, of course. But it is mysterious how many victims there are of what's happening. It's the babies. It's the babies and Herod. It's Herod's murder of the babies, isn't it?
Yeah. Which our Lord gave a very vivid description of what will happen for those that scandalize the little ones. And you're right. I get angry. I get angry at the perpetrators. When you see surgeons standing next to a child they've mutilated and the jagged scar across the chest where they've cut off their breast. I want to take the picture of that surgeon's face, log it, put it in a database for the reign of Mary, when justice will be done to those evildoers.
I hear you, and yeah. So we have to be aware of this. We have to look at these evils. Let it be an occasion for prayer, for reparation, and for surrender to God's mysterious providence. We know that He will bring good out of all this, it's time to surrender to God, absolutely, completely. This is God's making it pretty clear. If you don't, you may not make it. Okay, He wants to surrender, and also the greatest saints will appear at the end of time, as Louis de Montfort said. And I can't help but think that this is the time that those saints will arise, and maybe we're called to be those saints. And so, no, we are called to be them. We are.
Amen. Amen. Seek first the kingdom of heaven. Dr. Kozinski, thank you so much for your commentary, for your analysis, and for sharing your wisdom. Substack is Clemmy, and your podcast is it the Resisting the Plandemic?
Scamedic Resistance. I just started it. I have a couple of podcasts. I'm thinking of doing some interviews at some point. It's in early stages, but I got a couple of things up there, and we'll see how it goes. And the Substack is Clemmy is the name of my cat, so it's just kind of silly, but it makes me the subject matter of my Substack is so dire that I like to have a funny thing on there. But it's ThaddeusKozinski.substack.com. And the Scamedic Resistance is up on Apple Podcasts. It's also on Spotify and Anchor FM. You can find it there. And I'll be adding content probably once a week, once every 2 weeks. Hopefully more, though, if I can find the time.
Brilliant. We look forward to that, and I will add those links in the description below. Dr. Kozinski, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Theo. Take care. God bless you.